Hello and welcome to episode 138 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have shocking roster mania news, and we will get to the Major One Week 2 predictions and pick 'em at the end of the show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Pretty bit, little bit of a bombshell earlier today. That was unexpected, but yes, this is the new 2 shows a week format, paying dividends for us already, and we're gonna be able to talk to you about all the stuff that's been going on today over the past like 8ish hours. So, yeah, might as well hop right in.
Yeah, I big brained this. I knew something would happen on a Wednesday, and we needed to be here to talk about it. But in all seriousness, this is one of the most shocking roster moves that I can think of in a really long time. PRED, obviously one of OpTic's star players, is being replaced in the starting lineup by Huke. So OpTic Texas going forward, the defending world champions going forward with Huke instead of PRED. Just off the bat,
Allegedly.
allegedly, reportedly, it does seem that I think even Scump kind of he didn't confirm it, but he was talking about it enough that it lends to confirmation. And players like Zuma have been talking about it as well. So we should say that reportedly he is Pred is being replaced in the starting lineup by Huke. I just want to get your first thoughts just on that alone. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, immediate reaction to all the rumors and stuff aside, just talking about COD and the player for player swap. I mean, um, if Pred is one of the best SMG players in the league, a superstar talent, and really aggressive SMG player who can drop 1.2 KDs on a regular basis, and if you're gonna replace him for whatever reason with somebody who was currently in challengers at the time, Hook is almost like the best possible solution. Not only has he just been frying in this game based on everything I've heard and everything the community has basically been saying, but I mean, he's Hook the Nuke. Like, you know what he's capable of, right? And like, if for people who've been around long enough, like Hook coming up was probably like comparable to Pred when Pred first started competing in COD, right? Like, he's just this kid who's super aggressive, dropping numbers with an SMG and just going crazy over the map, slaying everything. So I mean, it really just like for a one-for-one player swap, regardless of reason and all that stuff, like just in terms of COD player stuff, it really makes sense that Hook could replace Pred. It's obviously very tough for anybody to replace Pred, but knowing the type of player Hook has been historically and has seemingly been so far early in challengers this year, it seems like he could be a good option. Obviously, gonna. I think it's important to note too, like chemistry shouldn't really be an issue for these guys because they obviously Shotzi and Hook played together in Dallas Empire. Um, Hook played with Shotzi and Dashy on OpTic when they played with Ghosty and MW2. Um, and I believe he played with Kenny when he had his very brief stint on LA Thieves.
He did.
That was a weird season with a lot of changes for LA Thieves, but needless to say, I mean, this guy's. I mean, I think Hook might have even played. No, he might have played on like an under 18 team with Kenny after like all of that stuff happened after the AW season and before like Hook went to Halo. But yeah, regardless of all that, yeah, this seems like a natural plug and play if that's actually what's going to happen. And it's not like you're trying to replace Pred with an unknown quantity. Like OpTic knows what Hook is capable of and what he can do, and if he can be Hook the Nuke as he seemingly has been very early this year in challengers, it seems like this could be, you know, if this was possibly like a month or two down the road, like who knows, maybe Hook has been so good in challengers he's already off the market and he's got a full time starting role on another CDL team. But the timing of this and when it's happening, um, you obviously don't want to make a change for PRED in any situation if you don't have to, but it seems like kind of like just a natural fit at this point. And on a less serious note, if this does come to fruition, we are both wrong on the first team to make a roster change this year. But I don't think either of us would have ever predicted this in any sort of universe.
Yeah, I don't think we should blame ourselves or kick ourselves for that. We should say off the top that we're obviously not going to speculate on anything as to why Pred is potentially being benched or whatever, because that's not our place. It's not our place to talk about at all until something reputable is kind of reported out, and then we can kind of discuss that. But until then, we just kind of float in the unknown a little bit.
Yeah. All we know right now is personal issues and stuff outside of the game. I can tell you guys when this stuff happened, I immediately the tweets started coming out, and I was texting Preston, and I immediately hopped in Zuma's stream when he went live, and right off the bat, Zuma was kind of saying he had heard that Huke was joining a team in the CDL. He was gassing it up. It felt like he was like, "You guys aren't gonna believe what team this is, all this yada yada." And he wasn't saying what it was. And then the CDL Scrim Intel tweet happened saying it's Huke for Pred, kind of opened the floodgates a little bit more. Breaking Point put out a report, and the initially the personal reasons aspect of it, Zuma was like, that's not what I heard. I just heard that this was happening, and he didn't have a reason. Then he shot a text, and almost immediately after he sent a text to somebody, Zuma was like, yeah, the personal issue stuff is what's going on, and I'm not going to talk about what it is because it's not my place. And Scum sort of had a similar response in his stream. He's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to talk about this stuff. And that's just where we're at right now. Maybe down the road we'll hear something from OpTic, Hex, PRED, etc. But till then, all we know for now is that Huke is potentially joining the roster, and obviously they play in less than 48 hours. Oh wait, do they play on Friday? Yeah, the last match on Friday. So roughly less than 48 hours from now, we'll find out for sure if Huke is in the lineup for PRED. We obviously, unless something major is announced, we won't know for sure if this is a long-term situation or just a short-term substitution. The good thing for OpTic, if in this situation, regardless, is obviously the holiday break is coming up. So if this is, potentially something that could take a month, it's really gonna only affect this week of matches. Obviously, if it's longer term than that, then they'll have to cross that bridge when they get there. But like I was saying, talking about the COD stuff, it feels like Huke is just based on what's available and what he's capable of. It's seemingly should be a good replacement if it goes through. Also worth noting too, on Zuma's stream, Benjay Nassim was mentioning something I just thought was interesting, and you might too, just from when stuff happens perspective. But he was saying that all roster changes that aren't emergency based, like if a team in the CDL wants to make a roster change or move a player to the bench, etc., it has to be submitted by Monday before. Also, if this was just an actual player trade or something like that, OpTic would have had to have reported it on Monday. And that's when Benjay was kind of speculating this more than likely has to be an emergency situation because it's happening very quickly and it's happening on a Wednesday. So that's something I just think, going forward, it doesn't really affect us because it doesn't necessarily mean that the teams are going to announce stuff on Mondays. If they have to, they just have to tell the league, right? And then that, I mean, they could wait all the way until whenever their next match is to actually announce it. But I just thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's what they'll do. I mean, since it'll be Thursday, I would imagine if this is going to happen, OpTic will probably announce something on Thursday. If not, maybe they'll just wait until a few hours before their match and they say, okay, this is what's happening. I do want to mention that coincidentally, OpTic is playing the Surge this weekend, so it would be a revenge game for Huke, who is on the Seattle Surge. But I don't know. This is obviously a unique situation. It's very rare that this stuff happens. We've talked about it. We talked about last season when New York went ahead and did not renew Priest's contract, and we talked about how rare that is for the defending world champions to make a roster change. Obviously, these are completely different circumstances, but like it is very, very rare to have this happen, and it's especially, I don't know when the last time this would have been, where a world champion came into a new season or just a few months after winning a world championship, and just a few matches in, they're like, we have to make a roster change. Obviously, we're in a weird spot, but I do want to mention how odd this is, and the timing of it, like you mentioned, really limits OpTic's or not their chances, but their options here. Who are you going to trade for if you were going to trade for someone? Who's going to be willing to trade with OpTic, and how much money is that going to cost that OpTic team? Like we saw with PRED, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Obviously, there's not a PRED out there to replace PRED with, but I mean, I don't even know what the best player OpTic could acquire realistically. Like, is Toronto offering up anybody? Is LAT going to offer up one of their super team members? Is Cloud9 going to do that? Like, or FaZe? Like, none of that really works out. And I think outside of those four teams, it doesn't really make any sense for OpTic to acquire a player that's already in the CDL. And like you mentioned, Huke has been, according to multiple people, very good in challengers. I think they won the Challengers Cup this past weekend or 2 weekends ago.
And I think they lost in the finals to Illy's team, this most recent one, but regardless.
And then Huke his career is unique. I would say he has, I don't know, like just winning a world championship on the Dallas Empire, and then the next season getting traded to LAT amid just like a weird, bizarre situation with like him and Crimsix and those Empire guys. He goes to LAT, and I will forever remember this Nate shot saying something along the lines of like, this is, when a player like Huke comes available, you have to drop everything and change everything to get him. And like 2 months later, he was benched and wasn't even on LAT anymore. He goes to LAG, he bounces to OpTic, and he has like, I think, quite a bit of success for OpTic. They were obviously in I guess if you want to make a comparison, the craziness of it is, Scump retiring after, I believe that was like the major 2 qualifiers, like week 1 of the major 2 qualifiers, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's like a month into the season, he suddenly retires, and they scramble, and they get, I believe, Huke, and they played an event with like Huke, Illy, Dashy, and Shotzi, and then they bench Illy, they bring in Ghosty, and then they have like a really good season and flame out at champs, which is was a surprise at the time. But I don't know, like Huke is a really interesting player. He seems pretty insightful from the videos and things that I've seen him in the interviews that he's given. But maybe this is the chance that he needed, because he wasn't in the CDL to begin with, which I think was a little bit of a surprise to people. But yeah, it's a weird situation. I hope everything works out the way that, where, people aren't getting like hurt or anything, or any bad things are happening. But, this is a great opportunity for Huke. If it's not maybe a long-term opportunity for Huke in OpTic, it gives him certainly the platform to find another CDL team to play on for the rest of the season. So
yeah, definitely. And obviously, hoping the best for PRED, just regardless of whatever his situation is, and hopefully we'll see him back in action sooner rather than later. It is kind of interesting that you just alluded to it a little bit. Like, this would be Huke's second stint on OpTic if you're not counting like his Envy and Dallas time, and he'd be replacing Scump and PRED if it comes to fruition. And I was not comparing Scump to PRED, but those are two still pretty big, high-profile names for you to like come into a team and try and fill the shoes of right off the bat. So, But yeah, I mean, regardless, I think we kind of said enough at this point. We know what Huke is, know what he's capable of. If he's able to showcase that, it should, for the green wall's sake, hopefully it should pay dividends.
How do you foresee this changing the power rankings, or the power structure of the CDL? Because when we did our power rankings before the season, we both had OpTic in the top tier, whatever our top tier was. It was different for each of us, but we had OpTic in there, and right there with them was LAT in Atlanta. Obviously, LAT in week one looked incredible. Atlanta, not so much. OpTic was hit and miss. The second match they looked incredible. The first match they did not. So moving forward, if Huke is a long-term option, let's say, how does that change where you would rank OpTic in relation to some of those top teams in the CDL?
I think it's still too early to tell, to be honest. I mean, if LAT 3-0 smoked FaZe and FaZe didn't look competitive in those last two matches of their series, to end last week, I would have already been willing to say LAT is S tier by itself, then FaZe and OpTic below that, et cetera, et cetera. I think FaZe at least being competitive in those last couple maps kind of makes it okay, we don't need to jump to those conclusions just yet. And I think overall, even with OpTic losing to Boston, I don't think we have to say, oh, we gotta shift the power rankings around or whatever. Like I said, I mean, this is still 3/4 of the defending world champions, and they are not replacing him with some rookie no-name guy. They're replacing him with another world champion and a player, like we've said now a couple times tonight already, that is just everything we've seen so far and heard so far from him competing this year in challengers is that he's just been an absolute force on the map. So if you're going to try and replace a force on the map from an S&G perspective, you're going to want to do it with somebody else who's getting that same sort of respect, or I can't think of the word right now, but the same sort of reputation. That's what I want to say. And that's what we've been hearing so far from Huke. And if he can be Huke the Nuke of old, and not necessarily of old, but just the Huke the Nuke we know he's capable of being, then I still think OpTic's a really dangerous team. And I mean, I think it was Shotzi saying either there was a clip, I think maybe it was on the Scump Watch Party, of him saying their practice just wasn't great leading up to that first week of matches. So it's not like Hook's coming into a situation where it's oh, we have to, reinvent the wheel sort of deal. It's if the practice wasn't great, then having someone slide into that situation where you're kind of going over a ton of stuff to try and improve the practice too, that's kind of a good opportunity for somebody to jump in my opinion, at least. If we were saying, oh, if Shotzi was our practice is really great, everything's going well, and then a drastic change like this happens, that feels like it would be a less opportune time for something like this to happen. But because potentially Shotzi was, I'm pretty sure I saw that clip of him saying just things weren't great practice wise leading up to the first week of matches, then I feel like that's a time where coaching staff's going to want to go over a little bit more, and that's a good time for a new player because you're going to go over that sort of stuff with a new player anyway. So might just be again, not something that anybody wants to happen or have foreseen, but just based on the circumstances and what's available, this I could see this being just a move that's very natural, and OpTic still is a top 3 team.
Yeah, the fact that they already did it once with him does give me a little more confidence than if he hadn't actually come through this situation before. I just went back and I looked through some of the results that they had when he went from LAG to OpTic in MW2, and he's on LAG for Major 1. He comes in, during the Major 2 qualifiers, plays alongside Shotzi, Illy, Dashi. They get first in those qualifiers and then go to Major 2. They get fourth place. They make a roster change. They bench Illy, bring in Ghosty. They end up getting, they weren't very good in the next qualifiers as they were getting kind of used to Ghosty. Then they got second at Major 3. They were the top team in the Major 4 qualifiers, got second again at Major 4, were the top team in Major 5 qualifiers, and then they flamed out at Major 5. I believe that was Boston and Florida they lost to. I'm pretty sure Florida was certainly one of the two teams that beat them in Major 5, and then they went to champs and they got top 6. But obviously that season ended on a sour note, and I think that was part of the reason why they made the roster change, because if they had finished on a really high note and they felt like this was a championship roster, they probably would have kept Huke, probably would have kept Ghosty. Those two guys depart. They bring in Kenny and PRED, and rest is history. Like, they won a world championship, so there's nothing really to gripe about there. But I do believe that there could be a scenario where Huke and OpTic work well together right off the bat, and it maybe not seamless, but more seamless than you would imagine this kind of roster change being. So, but we will have to see, obviously, and we'll get two chances to see how things are working out this coming weekend. Let's get to these pick'ems, and we'll kind of discuss a little bit more than we usually. We kind of fly through the pick'ems typically, but since there's, I texted you earlier today right as this PRED stuff was happening or being tweeted about, and I was like, we don't really have much to talk about, like, so on and so forth. And I mean, we do have some stuff to talk about with the PRED stuff and the Huke, but I think we could take a little more time on these pick'ems and just give our thoughts on maybe what we would like to see from some of these teams as they go into week 2, and maybe what we saw from them in week 1. And if you want to go back, I would suggest doing so with the last 2 episodes, I think, or the last episode, certainly. We talked about kind of what we thought and maybe what are some of our questions coming out of week 1 for some of those teams. So starting on Friday, December 13th, we start with the Battle of Los Angeles. Historically, a one-sided rivalry in favor of the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I don't know if that will continue, because this is the Los Angeles Guerrillas mate, and LAT seems like they might have the most talented roster that they've ever had, and that's saying a lot considering they already won a world championship before.
Yeah.
But LAT versus LAG in the opening match of Friday. Who do you have, and maybe why do you? I assume where you're going, but what do you think? Or let me phrase it this way: how or what do you need to see out of LAG, and what do you need to see out of LAT, or what do you expect to see?
I mean, yeah, I gotta pick LAT here, just regardless of the past Battle of LA success that LAG has seen. Maybe new era with the super team and gentlemates. That causes a little bit of a switch up here in the quote unquote rivalry. But in all seriousness, like I just said a couple minutes ago, like if LA Thieves closed out a dominant 3-0 sweep over Atlanta FaZe to close out last week's matches, like I'm just sitting here like, yeah, this team is just absolutely frying right now, looking leagues above everybody else. And again, small sample size, so we don't want to rush into any statements like that, like saying it's the best team in LA Thieves history and they had a team that won a world championship. But hey, I mean, that's the sort of thing we talked about when we talked about storylines and expectations for this team, right? Like, that's the bar that's being set with this team. We know the talent they have. We've heard all the stuff about, like, Nadeshot saying he's taking a pay cut to make this happen, and the fans and the organization, they are expecting championships and multiple plural. So yeah, this is a match you expect like these to continue to come out and look strong in. LAG, I know for me last week, just off the top of my head, I know I said, like, there were some moments where I was glad to see Lynn's playing well, and because that was like the storyline for Gentlemates, is like this NYSL roster from 2023 minus Hydra plus Lynn's. Can Lynn's fill those shoes? And we're like, no, those are very lofty expectations. But I mean, again, small sample size, but Lynn's definitely was like, he was performing in those matches. And if he can keep on improving and building off of these early performances and turn into like a true, just consistent SMG slayer, like that should be a very good sign for this Gentlemate squad. Um, it is, a bit of a rivalry game, not only from the Battle of LA, but like Hydra's former teammates for the past couple of years. Um, Getting a shot to try and upset and, I don't think taint is necessarily the right word, but kind of just like, um, put a damper on the whole super team talk. This is their chance to do that. Maybe if 99 Kiz comes out just absolutely frying like the bulldog he is, then um, they might have a shot to pull off an upset. But I definitely think this is one that LAT should comfortably win.
Yeah, I agree with you. There. I mean, there's been great talent disparities in the past with these two teams, and it didn't really seem to matter much. I just tend to think that the talent disparity here, uh, and that's not even a slight at LAG, because I think this is one of the best LAG or whatever, this franchise. I think this is one of the better rosters that they've had in their history. It's just that LAT is an incredible collection of talent, and granted, we've only seen two matches from them in an official basis. So maybe I should temper my expectations. But what I saw from them in week one was extremely promising, that they will be one of, if not the top team in the CDL this season. There's a reason I picked them to win the world championship this season. So I do expect a lot out of them, and I do expect them to win. But I am very interested in Gorilla's mate, and I believe that this team is better than what they showed in week one. Certainly, they definitely need to cut down on some of the mistakes that they made, and probably cost them at least one of those matches in week one. And the intrigue of seeing Hydra play the NYSL guys, and vice versa, just seeing how things go with that. If there's any ill will, maybe a little bodies being shot, who knows? But it would be fun to see another rivalry kind of be born inside of this already pre-existing rivalry. Next up, we got Cloud9 New York versus the Minnesota ROKKR. One team 2-0. Quite surprisingly, I don't think a lot of people expected the ROKKR to finish the first week undefeated. And then a team that I think a lot of people had pretty high hopes, but had probably the most disappointing week one of any team in the CDL. And speaking of that is Cloud9. I'm going to go with C9 only because I believe that they have a higher ceiling here. I don't think what they showed in week one, I hope what they showed in week one is not what they really are. But the internet issues that Attach brought up earlier this week probably can't be ignored. So if anybody wants to go with the ROKKR, I think that's a pretty good reason to do so. So who are you going with, C9 or the ROKKR?
Yeah, I mean, you basically took my spiel, but yeah, I'm going with the ROKKR. And really, the main reason right now is those internet issues. We just don't know what the situation's gonna be like. I mean, obviously Minnesota has that facility in Minnesota, but that was like pre G2 merger and stuff. So like, I don't even know if that's still being used, like where the players are playing out of.
No idea.
But let's just say like for a lack
Either
of,
way.
regardless, yeah, but like for just using common sense, like if Minnesota ROKKR still has that facility and they're competing out of Minnesota, that's even further away from LA than Texas. And obviously we already heard about all those issues between finding a good server for C9 to compete on against teams from Texas. So like if you're moving further away down to Minnesota, it's not all the way on like the East Coast or something like that, but like I don't know. I just don't know how much of an influence the server stuff is going to have on this series, but I think this is a good test either way for C9, right? Like we
Yeah.
kind of both said last time, like those matches that C9 played against OpTic and LA Thieves, they were going to be hard, whether they were on LAN, on perfect ping, etc. This is a team that, on paper, this being Minnesota, the Minnesota team, despite their 2-0 start, which, again, it's just a couple rounds of search and destroy away from them being like 0-2 or 1-1. This is a team on paper that, you expect Cloud9 to beat Minnesota just based on, you know, pedigree of players and,
Mhm.
past experience and all that stuff. But if there are internet issues, are C9 able to overcome them against a team like Minnesota that on paper people expect them to be, or is that just like going to be an insurmountable obstacle for the C9 team just in all facets of online right now, and that could put them on the back foot for the rest of the season? That's definitely what I'm most interested to see in this matchup, regardless of result, is just, I guess, how does C9 respond from just everything that happened last week? Obviously, if they get put on just some crazy ping disadvantage and it's like they can't even shoot straight and they're rubber banding, etc., like that's just tough, and we're still not going to get a good gauge. But like if there's just this is the type of opportunity that C9 has to sort of like show what they're capable of and
Mhm.
show they're able to battle the obstacles, overcome, all these sorts of hurdles and whatnot, and show what they're capable of. So I'm gonna go with Minnesota for this match purely based on um, the online server stuff that's been going on. But like I just said, this is a match on paper that you would most people I feel like would expect C9 to beat Minnesota.
Yeah, and like you were kind of mentioning, if Cloud9 loses this and they play Carolina later in the weekend, if they were to say lose both of those matches and maybe they chalk it up to internet, well, I mean that's gonna suck for them because there's 7 qualifying matches for Major One, and if they can't beat two of the teams that I think most people would consider to be like middle of the pack or lower. Like I don't think anybody has Carolina or Minnesota. Maybe after week 1 you're a little higher on them than you were going in, but I think most people would consider them to be at best like the 5th or 6th best teams in the league. If Cloud9 can't beat those two teams online, they're going to have a really hard time beating literally anybody online, and that's just going to take a heavy toll on this team, and where they kind of get seeded in the majors or in the minors. And again, that affects your CDL points, and that, by extension, affects if you're going to get to champs, or if you do get to champs, where you're going to be seated. And granted, this is really early in the season, but I do think that these matches matter, and beating teams that you're quote unquote supposed to beat, that matters quite a bit. Next match, Miami versus Boston. Um, Man, Boston coming off of the OpTic win in week 1, but also a close loss. I could see them beating Miami. I don't think that it's nearly as unpredictable for the Breach to win this kind of match. But I'm leaning towards the Heretics. Real looked incredible. I kind of waxed poetic about him on the last show about how great he looked, and if he can look even remotely as good, man, they're going to be really hard to beat. But if Boston, I think they played with a lot of fire, and they certainly in S&D they just looked flat out better than OpTic in a lot of ways, which was kind of surprising considering how good a lot of those players from OpTic are in Search. So maybe that could be something to watch as we move forward through this season. But I'm going to go with Miami. Who are you going with?
Yeah, I'm taking Miami too. I just think in general the storyline or just what I'm looking for in this match is just to increase the sample size really for both of these teams, right? Like we see Boston pull off an upset um, over OpTic, definitely wasn't expected by anybody, and we also see Real drop a 1.5 KD in a loss. And we kind of already talked about like Real being that X factor, continuing to develop. Like he joined the team last year and just slowly got better as they played more and more games with him. How they're able to continue to build off of that this year. Like obviously he's off to a really good start in a short time, but like this is just another 2-1-1 teams, another match to give us more of an opportunity to see what they're both capable of. Um, I gotta go with Miami too, but I mean, it's just like I said, the more my head's at right now is it's just another opportunity to see what both teams can be and what they're able to do. Like, um, if Boston struggles this week after the OpTic match, then obviously people are just going to immediately jump back onto like, oh, that was just like a fluke or whatever. But if Boston comes out and has a really strong performance against Miami, which again they're not like necessarily world beaters or S tier, but they are a pretty highly regarded team heading into this year. I think like at least like fourth through sixth range somewhere in there. Um, if Boston's able to get another win, that's just a huge, notch in the belt for this squad. Like they're already on the road to having a better season than they did last year. Um, but overall, regardless of the result, I just want to see more of both of these teams, and that's really what I think this match is going to deliver. I mean, wouldn't be surprised if it goes Game 5, but give me Miami.
I mean, Boston game 5, kind of a match made in heaven at this point. But yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like where these teams are in relation to each other is important because that like 6 through 12 is just kind of like a glob of teams that is very difficult to kind of decipher who is supposed to be better than who, especially at this point in the season with all these new rosters. So the more we get to see of them, and especially the more we get to see of them play each other, I think that really helps kind of see who is actually on a, obviously small sample size, but who's supposed to be better going forward. And then the last match of Friday will be probably one of the most anticipated matches of the entire weekend. OpTic Texas versus the Vancouver Surge. Obviously, Vancouver coming off of a pretty good weekend. They were, I think, one Game 5 round 11 away from going 2-0. They went 1-1. OpTic, as we just mentioned, lost at Boston in their first match and came back and won their second match of the weekend. Went 1-1. There's all the rumors and stuff that Huke will be stepping in for PRED now. Does that change your prediction? Obviously, I think if PRED was in there, there's no doubt that you would have picked OpTic over Vancouver. But now that it looks like it might be Huke instead of PRED, does that change anything in regards to this prediction?
No, I'm still gonna go with OpTic, but I mean, it's gonna sound like a broken record. Potentially, it's not the same thing I usually say, but if you're looking at this from a Vancouver perspective, like you gotta feel like this is like your best shot at OpTic, right?
Yeah.
Like just the uncertainty and all that's going on around them. Like if this is just World Championship, OpTic coming in, no issues, full week of practice with the squad, like you got to feel a little bit better about your chances against OpTic with everything that's potentially going on behind the scenes. But regardless of that, I just think there's more talent on OpTic. I expect Huke to come in and it almost be like a seamless fit, and that's what I'm thinking. So wouldn't have any reason to pick against OpTic here.
I'm actually going to go with the Surge because OpTic looked shaky in Search this past weekend. I think it would only be
OpTic
worse
special.
to start out with Huke because they gotta change some things, I would imagine, or just integrate Huke into this lineup and what they want to do in Search specifically. I think respawns is a little bit easier for them to get accustomed to each other, but I mean it only takes one misstep in hardpoint or control, and I think that it's very reasonable for Seattle to pull off an upset, essentially just playing like 2-3-5 or something like that.
It's not necessarily. I'm just thinking. Remember how there were all those jokes about like Pred laying down stuff from like the Green Wall and the comp COD scene, just like say he lays down too much. Like,
Yeah.
obviously it's not search and destroy specific, but Hook has the funniest thing chance to just like first first pan to him on like a match this year. He's just laying down somewhere. And the Green Wall would probably lose their minds. I don't know why I just thought of that off the rip, but that would be funny. I don't expect that. But I mean, I don't really think like I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, but I don't like it. I don't think Pred's the bomb carrier for OpTic. I really think he's just like that guy who like fills a lane or he rushes something. I feel like who can do that pretty well too. But again, I mean a totally different game. Like they could just switch things up entirely for Black Ops 6. So I would agree with you that, regardless of, again, this isn't Huke coming in 6 months into the season too. It's like fresh that he's coming in with S&D. He has plenty of experience playing S&D with, I mean,
Hmm.
especially with Shotzi, but with Shotzi and Dashy too. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. I do agree with you though that like comparing, trying to do stuff for respawn versus do search, like that's probably going to be um, it might take a little longer to do that, but again, Hook's a really good search player and has experience playing search with these guys. So I really, my expectation is this should just be a seamless switch if it goes through, and I would be surprised otherwise.
Yeah, and I guess we'll see. What there's always the chance that it'll be a honeymoon period, and the first few weeks will be seamless essentially, or there's always the chance that they will run into trouble immediately. Granted, Vancouver is probably not the team that you would imagine would give them as tough of a test and kind of stress test them, so to speak. But we're gonna see Friday. That is the grand finale on Friday's matches. Saturday, December 14th, starting off with the Toronto Ultra and the Vegas Falcons. I don't think either one of us are going to pick the Falcons, but I am very, very interested to see how they match up with a team that we both consider to be in the top four in the CDL. They didn't play particularly tough competition last weekend, but they performed admirably. I said on the last podcast, I thought they just looked like a regular CDL team. They just, they didn't play well, but they definitely did not, get smoked, and it wasn't some lopsided result that makes you question their validity or whether they should be in the CDL or not. It wasn't anything like that. But Toronto is a different beast. They looked incredible in week one of the best teams in the league, I would say, in that first week. If Toronto's able to kind of carry that forward, it's going to be really tough for Vegas. So I'm going to go with the Ultra. What do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously got to go with Toronto here for those who were around last episode. I kind of went on a little bit of a rant. Some people might say it was glazing Toronto a little bit too much, but
I would say.
I was I was really excited and about what I saw last week from Toronto and the whole, Joe Deceives like possibly uh, play forcing Kleenex to play a little slower, change up his play style, yada yada. But all that aside, I mean, even if Toronto didn't look really strong last week in its initial matches, there's still a match on paper. I would expect Toronto to beat the Falcons. Just again, I mean, we said it last episode. Falcons looked better than probably some people expected, and they had some moments where they were shooting super straight, and I mean, they won a map against Carolina, and there's some people who might have thought like they might not even win a map in these online qualifiers, so they're already like ahead of the curve in that department and playing better than some people expected. But I mean, this is just another tough match on paper, one that you expect Toronto to take care of business and. But it will be another good opportunity for us to see Vegas in action, and you could probably argue it'll be their toughest test yet. Again, small sample size, but um, so seeing how they continue to develop and how they play against a quote unquote tougher team on paper should be another good opportunity to see what that Vegas squad is capable of.
Yeah, this week is not kind to the Falcons at all. They play Toronto and Atlanta. Those are two teams that, as you're kind of getting your footing under you in the CDL, I wouldn't imagine you would want to see either of those teams on your schedule, but that's the reality the Vegas Falcons face right now. Next matchup, OpTic and LAG, both teams playing their second match in 2 days. LAG plays LAT in the first match on Friday. OpTic plays Vancouver in the last match on Friday. They play each other in the second match on Saturday. Both of us, we picked against LAG in the first match. I picked against OpTic in their match. I don't think I can pick against OpTic to go 0-2. That feels a little bit too far. I also think that maybe Vancouver might be in a better place in the current moment than LAG are, but I could see flipping either of those picks. So I'm going to go with OpTic. I imagine if you're going to pick them against Vancouver, you would do the same against Gorillas Mate.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with OpTic here. I mean, I think again, um, just talking about the situation with Pred and Huke potentially coming in. Like, this is another situation where getting these two matches like back to back, and it's not like we're waiting around. Like, he's being thrown right into the fire, and I think that's potentially could be better for this team. It's just more reps again, very early on in the season, and I don't think it's going to matter too much. But yeah, I just think this is a match you expect OpTic to win with or without Pred or with Huke in the lineup. So um, I guess we'll have to see what Gentlemates is capable of, because that's two really tough matches on paper. Um, but yeah, I mean, just based on everything we know so far, I feel like you gotta go OpTic here.
Carolina versus Atlanta on Saturday. I'm gonna go with Atlanta, but man, like the records of these teams, you would expect them to be flipped if anything. Carolina
Yep.
enters with a 2-0 record. Atlanta went 0-2 in Week 1. Did not look nearly as good as anyone would expect out of consistently the best regular season team in the CDL. One of the contenders for the world championship every single year. They did not look like that in the first week. Granted, small sample size again, but it was a little disappointing, a little shocking. Carolina looked better than I thought they would. I did not have high hopes for them, but they looked pretty strong, all things considered, in those first two matches. I still think the talent gap is quite large between these two teams. But maybe this is a slasher revenge game, and he's
I was
able
just gonna
to
say.
he's going to pull off an upset. So are you going with Carolina and Slasher to pull off the upset here?
Nope, I'm going with Atlanta to pick up their first win. I said it last week when we were kind of talking about Atlanta's 0-2 start, and you posed the question like, "Are you worried?" etc. And I was like, no, not really. I mean, tough two matches to start for Atlanta, but if you look at their schedule, the rest of these online qualifiers here, there's a very realistic opportunity for them to just run the table now after this and win the next five and finish 5-2. But it all starts with this one, and again, kind of like you said, like you saw a 2-0 team versus 0-2 team for Atlanta versus Carolina, you might think the records would be the other way around, but that's not the world we live in right now. And
True.
Carolina has the momentum, so it's sort of like we got to see that. My thing with this match is can Carolina beat the quote unquote top teams, or the teams that are on paper you would expect them to have a tougher time with. And then for Atlanta, it's sort of like how do you respond to? I mean, I don't know for sure, but there's just a small possibility that's the first 0-2 week for like the Simpa Beasy duo or the Simpa Beasy Celium trio. Like, there's a very real chance that that's possible. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's true, but I just based on their success in these qualifiers in the past couple of years, I can't think of very many chances where they would have went 0-2. Um, Regardless of whether that is the case or not. It's the case right now. They went 0-2 in the first two matches. So how do they respond? How do they bounce back? Um, they got the opportunity here to play a team that, I mean, even if you look at LA Thieves, like you thinking of just the competitive mindset of those guys on that FaZe team, they go into any match thinking they can beat anybody, right? That's just like the type of players they are and the type of players they've been, and they deserve to have that mindset just based on their success individually and just in general in the CDL. But that you got to think if they're going to be championship contenders like a lot of people expect this year, they got to have that killer mentality and be like, all right, we're going in and we're trying to just 100-point club, map one, 6-0 search, 3-0 control, make it a
Mm-hmm.
30-minute series, see you later. And if Carolina puts up a fight, like, that's possibly a sign that Carolina is just better than some people anticipated. But um, it's just, again, another opportunity for us to see early on what both of these squads are capable of. But it's definitely a match that I expect Atlanta to win. And if Atlanta loses either of its matches this week, my place on like a worry meter is definitely creeping less from zero towards the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned it with Carolina, and um, if they're able to beat some of these top teams or who we think are some of the top teams, and Atlanta would be in that consideration. That was kind of their issue last year, is they could not beat those top teams, and a lot of teams couldn't. So it's not really a Carolina exclusive issue. But the Ravens essentially just beat up on some of the worst teams in the league, like the Boston Breaches of the world, but couldn't really consistently put it together against even teams like LAT, and certainly not Atlanta, New York, and OpTic and FaZe and all that. So it's one of those things where if they're able to pick up this kind of win, and maybe that shows that they're going to be able to semi-consistently beat teams that we consider to be in the top half of the league, that really helps their case for champs and moving forward and being what we consider as like maybe not contenders, but like a contenders light, a team that could sneak into the top 3 very easily just by the nature of the tournaments and everything. So we're going to see, it's going to be, I think this is one of the more interesting matchups this weekend, just by virtue of what these two teams did in week 1. And I don't think that this would have been really on my radar going into week 2 had they just had like what we thought they were going to do in the first week of the CDL season. The last match on Saturday is the Boston Breach and the Vancouver Surge. I can't pick Boston consistently. I didn't pick them against Miami. I'm not sure why I would pick them against Vancouver, especially if I'm going to pick Vancouver over OpTic. So I'm going to go with the Surge, but both these teams, they seem like pretty, not even necessarily, but I could see this going either way very, very easily.
I think, I'm going to go with Vancouver here too. And I think I'm in a similar mindset of you, is just like, I can't really pick Boston until I've seen more out of them. And at the same time, like, technically these 4 players on Boston have more experience competing together than the 4 players on Vancouver, just because this Boston roster has that Esports World Cup experience. So it's like it's tough to say, just like, everything we saw in the coaches polls and all that stuff from off-season talk, preseason talk, is that on paper most people expect Vancouver to be a better team than Boston, and I just need to see more from both of these teams realistically. But for now, I'm gonna go with Vancouver, and we'll see what we get. I mean, these are definitely, from a Boston perspective, playing against Miami and Vancouver. It's especially after taking into consideration the OpTic upset. It's 2 matches that they, in theory, could win. I mean, you can say that about any match for any team, really. But it's definitely, I feel like in many people's eyes, that's more of a realistic possibility than in like last year. You wouldn't really consider that as much of a possibility, I feel like. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out, but I'll go with Vancouver here.
And then we got Sunday, December 15th. We have 4 matches to finish out week 2 and before we get into the holiday break. The first match on Sunday, Toronto versus Miami. I don't think that anyone should pick Miami over Toronto, from what we saw at least in week 1. So I'm going to go with the Ultra. I feel relatively confident, and I'm expecting fully for the Heretics to completely throw that on its head.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Toronto here too, but I will say, from like sticking with our theme of having more to talk about with each of these matches, I mean, based on what I have said over last episode and this episode already about just like the Joe Deceives and Kleenex sub duo, and then what I've talked about with Real from a Miami perspective, like, this is a really good test for Real. It's a it's a tough matchup on paper, not only for the whole team, but just like he's going up against again, very early, but like, especially Kleenex, you know what type of SMG talent he is, and like I don't know. I feel like this is a good test for Real, and another opportunity for him to showcase what he's capable of doing. At the same time, it's another opportunity for us to see just how this what really the expectations can be for this new Toronto team. So I mean, it does just feels weird talking about some of this stuff just after 2 matches, really. But we're in this phase of the online matches to get a better idea for where all these teams are at. So I'm excited to see that showdown, really Clean X versus Real from like a sub perspective. Um, but I expect Toronto to win this one, and we'll have to see how it goes down.
Well, and the thing about this is it does feel early because it is early to talk about some of this stuff. But after this week, these teams will be halfway through the qualifier stage,
Yeah.
or more than halfway because we're playing 7 qualifier matches. Each team will, I think, have played 4 after this week. So, this is a good chunk of what we've seen of this team. Granted, it is not a big sample size. We don't really get a lot to see or base our opinions on these teams as we kind of get into the new year, but that's just kind of how it is, and it makes it fun. We're a little more tempered with our reactions, I think, as we go forward in the season, and once we get to like March, April, we know generally what some of these teams are at that point. We have no idea what a lot of these teams are right now, and that makes it, I think, pretty fun. Next matchup, Atlanta versus Vegas. I think that's kind of the perfect example of that. Like, what are these teams? We're still trying to figure out if Vegas can be, can beat a CDL team, like where they kind of can fit into the Call of Duty League. And Atlanta, we're trying to see, especially if they were to lose to Carolina on Saturday, going into this match, that makes this match even bigger, simply because, like, if they lost to Vegas, like you said, your panic meter or whatever would, certainly be inching closer and closer to full on panic, I would imagine. So I'm gonna go with go with FaZe here, but man, like
I
I
really, you said the there. I really thought you were gonna say I'm going with the Falcons.
the FaZe. I don't think anyone should pick Vegas Falcons, but crazier things probably have happened in Call of Duty, but this would be one of the craziest things.
It would, but I mean, we literally are less than a week away from OpTic losing to Boston, and there are people who would say that would be one of the crazier things to expect, just based on where the teams ended last year. But jokes aside, I will say we saw this exact matchup at the Esports World Cup between FaZe and they were just Falcons before the Vegas merger, and it was a 3-0 for Atlanta. We'll say most of the matches except the control, I believe, were relatively close, definitely closer than some people were expecting. And that was our first taste of this Vegas Falcons roster back then, or I should just say the Falcons roster before they went to Vegas. That was really most people in the CDL world their first taste of what this squad is capable of, and it was like, whoa, I mean, again, it's not like they got 10-point clubbed like some team against Complexity back at like COD Champs 2012 or whatever it was. They at least it was relatively competitive from the Falcons back at Esports World Cup against FaZe. I still expect FaZe to win this one, regardless of everything that regardless of the 0-2 start and regardless of what happened in the Carolina matchup. And like you said, I mean, if the Falcons are able to pull off an upset here, it would definitely be a massive talking point for us on the next show. But give me FaZe here.
Yeah, so just to kind of give a little context on that Esports World Cup match, FaZe, like you mentioned, won 3-0. The hard point was 250, 175. The search and destroy was 6-3, and the control was 3-0. I mean, it's like a decent, like it's obviously a sweep, but it's not like the most convincing or most lopsided sweep I've ever seen. So that's kind of the I am grading the Falcons on a curve, and I'm grading FaZe on a curve as well, like on the opposite direction generally. But I don't know, like there's just no way that Atlanta should lose to Vegas. But if they look like week 1 FaZe, then it is a possibility. Not even a good possibility, but it is a possibility, and that's something that we have to kind of prepare ourselves for, I guess. Carolina versus Cloud9 in the next match on Sunday. Again, like, is Carolina in Texas or are they based in Carolina? Because last season, Clayster moved to Charlotte, I think, for the season, if I'm not mistaken, and they were playing together from a facility in North Carolina. So I don't know if that's a thing this season.
I'm pretty sure they're in Carolina, and I'm pretty because I feel like I remember Brian Saints like tweeting about moving, and but man, I can't remember, but I have a feeling that they're in Carolina. I think there was like that the pre like match video or whatever that
Mm,
um the Royal Ravens have done. I think that was like filmed in, you know,
okay.
somewhere in the Carolinas. I think like I mean it looks like there's footage from that. I got it watched up right now and like I don't
But
know.
th-
It's tough to tell, but
the reason I
um
bring it up though is because if they are in North
yeah,
Carolina, that is cross country, and
yep,
Cloud9 already complained about how bad it was for them playing against teams in, was it Texas they were complaining about? Like,
yep,
so if you're, and we think that they're probably playing a team from Minnesota in the first first part of this week, and then they're playing a team from North Carolina. Those issues would probably be even worse, I would imagine. Maybe I'm wrong. I am not up to par with my ping knowledge nowadays, but it
yeah.
would seem worse or at least about the same. And if that's the case, then Cloud9 is in for another one. I'll go C9. Just I tend not to base a lot of my decisions on the internet stuff, but it is something to consider. And I'm sure because you picked against Cloud9 in the first match, I'm sure it's in your consideration as well.
No, yeah, I think that's definitely like where my head's at with this one. I'm leaning towards Carolina, but as we kind of talk about it, like I think again, we don't want to we aren't ping experts or server experts from any person, in any realm. Um but I think like just based on like attaches tweets and stuff, there was a specific issue with that Denver server, and obviously the Denver server is where they were pinging from because that's like the middle point for Texas and California. So if there's like a Texas server or another server in like the middle of the U.S. that's between Carolina and Los Angeles, if Carolina's playing from Carolina, then maybe the server issues won't be as big of a deal for them not playing a team in Texas. So I mean, even going back to the Minnesota series, if Minnesota's playing from Minnesota, maybe this is a good thing for Cloud9. Like they just don't have to deal with um, playing on that quote unquote whatever the server was because they couldn't play on Denver or whatever. Like maybe there's like a middle ground and they're gonna in these online matches, C9's gonna have just level ground against the teams not in Texas, and then they're gonna struggle against the teams in Texas because of that server issue or whatever. I don't know. It's a lot of uncertainty and whatnot. Um, Again, this is a match heading into this, and just based on the teams on paper and stuff that most people are probably leaning towards Cloud9 in, but just with the uncertainty and everything, I'm gonna throw a dart and go with Carolina here.
And last match on Sunday is the Los Angeles Thieves versus the Minnesota ROKKR. I'm going to go with LAT. I think that's pretty obvious from how I've been talking about them. But
Yeah.
this is a great test for Minnesota.
Yep.
Just like in the first matchup, we talked about if Minnesota can beat Cloud9, they can go to 3-0. Just the internet issues aside in that series, potentially, that would be a huge thing for them because we thought Cloud9 would be among like the top 4 teams in the CDL coming into the season, or maybe top 5 if you thought maybe Toronto was better than them. But if they go into this last match, they play LAT hard. If they were to beat LAT, then I think our power rankings have to kind of at least you know maybe budge a little bit. I certainly think that those wins and a win against LAT would be kind of a game changer in that
Oh yeah.
to that extent. But I fully expect the Thieves to win. So I expect you also think that LAT will win.
Yeah, I'm not picking against LA Thieves until further notice or until I'm given a reason to do so. But you basically took the words right out of my mouth. This is just a great test for the Minnesota team, regardless of what happens in their first matchup of this week. Like, if you're gonna be a team that makes some things happen this year, prove some people wrong, etc. Like this is an opportunity to do so and show what these guys are capable of. Again, in other shows, I've said like how I want to see Geo and Nero really show they're just be more consistent on a slaying perspective, and this is a tough task and a tough ask to do so against a very talented LAT team. But if they're able to fight fire with fire and keep pace with LAT. That's kind of probably their path to victory. Although I say that, but like um, maybe search and destroy just based on them having the clutch gene very early on in the season with the round 11. Maybe that's their path to victory. I don't know. Still think it's one that, again, not picking against LAT till I have a reason to, but definitely excited to see how Minnesota stacks up here. I mean, we could be back right here later in the week talking about LAT just 3-0 stopping them, but it could. Minnesota has the chance to make things a little more interesting. And I don't think it's as similar to, the OpTic versus Boston thing where I was kind of saying like, everyone's picking OpTic to beat Boston. You have nothing to lose and you can just go out there and play free COD, and worst case scenario, you lose like everyone expects. And I guess that's kind of similar to Minnesota. It's not the same situation because, it's not like Minnesota was one of the worst teams in the league last year or, whatever. But
Not Boston.
different roster and all that, yada yada. But yeah, end of the day, this is one I expect LA Thieves to win. But it will be an interesting test for the young ROKKR squad.
So that does it for the pick'em. So to refresh from last week, you went 8-4 in the week 1 pick'em. I went 7-5. Obviously, these are new rosters, so we're kind of getting used to them as well. And we kind of disagreed on some of them a little bit earlier in the week, but I think a lot of these things shake out how we expect them to a lot of times, and some of them don't, and we'll really see if OpTic is a completely different team. I think that's the biggest wild card going into this weekend, and someone just if Minnesota and like Carolina are able to kind of keep up the pace, that really changes things, like how matches are going to go in the future. I think if those teams prove to be like a really, really solid force in the middle of the pack. So that does it for the pick'em. Those will be the final qualifying matches for more than a month because the CDL is going on a holiday break. So after Sunday, December 15th, after those matches on Sunday, there will be no CDL matches for nearly a month. Then the CDL minor is coming back January 10th. The first CDL minor will go from January 10th to the 12th. And that's an online single elimination tournament. And these matches, as well as the first week of qualifying matches, those will determine the seeds for those minors. I think we should mention that as well. So the standings after this week of qualifying matches, that will be how those teams are seeded into the minor bracket. And then the following week, starting on January 17th, the qualifying matches will resume, and then they'll play. Each team will play 3 additional qualifying matches over I think the next 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of the qualifying period, and then we'll get to the first major of the season. So obviously we have a lot of time until the first major, but I did want to kind of update the audience on the schedule as we move forward. For us, I expect that we'll be back on Sunday for the live show. If you're a fan of the YouTube channel, you like watching the videos, or you like listening to the podcast, that is Monday morning for you. Those videos or podcast episodes will be uploaded Monday morning. And we really appreciate all the support that we've been getting on the podcast and the YouTube videos, and even the Twitch stream as well. We always appreciate that kind of stuff. If you have any feedback or any constructive criticism, maybe unconstructive, I don't know, or I don't know if unconstructive is a word, but any kind of stuff that you think could help better this podcast, please let us know. And please, if you are not currently subscribed or not currently liking or following the podcast, please do so. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, obviously we're on YouTube as well. Make sure to support us however you can. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, podcast at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I said, expect the next show to be on the live show to be on Sunday. Podcast comes out on Monday. And then we'll try to figure out what we're doing for the holidays. Obviously, I'll be out of town a little bit. Bink's got family coming into town. So like a lot of that stuff, we'll play it by ear, but we will let you know regardless. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Kind of like Preston said, I mean, we've got a bunch of people commenting tonight and the YouTube stream and whatnot. So thank you guys as always. And yeah, I mean, already 1 week into the season, we got a potential roster change coming up. So we're still gonna have to keep our eyes out for official confirmation and all that stuff. But we should have more to talk to you guys about as soon as this final set of matches before the holiday season or holiday season comes up. Kind of babbling now, so yeah, I don't got much else, but thank you guys as always, and we'll see you when we see you again. Remember to send the chow.